Awesome. So good afternoon, everyone. Happy 4:33 and happy Wednesday. And thank you for joining us for the first ever Youth Organizing and Education Justice Mayoral Candidate Forum. I will be your moderator. My name is Dr. Masha Jean-Charles, and I am the lead organizer and coordinator of the Liberation Program of the Brotherhood Sister Sol. For more than 25 years, the Brotherhood Sister Sol, or BroSis as we call it, has been at the forefront of social justice, educating, organizing, and training to challenge inequity and create opportunity for all. With a focus on Black and Latinx youth, BroSis is where young people claim their power, the power of their history, identity, and community to build the future they all want to see. This forum is co-hosted by the Brotherhood Sister Sol, Children's Defense Fund New York, Dignity in Schools New York, Girls for Gender Equity, Integrate NYC, NYCLU Teen Activist Project, Urban Youth Collaborative, and the Youth Power Coalition. Thank you to all the organizations, and especially the young people in these organizations and coalitions who helped to put this together and who effectively made this happen. Thank you to the people who submitted questions for our panel today. We had about 172 submissions, and 157 of those were from young people under 20. And so a lot of these questions, all of these questions, in fact, are amalgams of those questions. And we're asking questions based on what young people wanted to ask today. The purpose of this forum is to prioritize youth issues and voices on topics including, but of course never limited to, educational equity, student wellness and mental health, and transformative student support for our schools. Themes for today include youth criminalization, youth civic engagement, and especially youth power. We forum co-hosts believe that all plans for the future of New York City schools must be student-centered and community-led. Such a plan has to be co-created by students and families so as to ensure educational equity and restorative justice. In deciding who our city's future mayor is, we who can vote support candidates who share our vision for the future of New York City. During this forum, candidates, you all, will be answering questions sourced again by young people throughout the city. Thank you for submitting those via social media or the preceding political education workshops. And thank you also to all the people who read our policy paper. It took a lot of work to put together, and so I invite folks to continue to do that. Lastly, each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. You'll see that 90 seconds on this timer right here. And each question will be answered in rotating order. I will share that order before the question goes or thereafter. Youth from co-hosting organizations will ask those questions. And after each question is asked and answered, I will invite candidates to a yes or no vote on a related question. Of course, we reserve the right to ask follow-up questions as needed to one person each question round. As a reminder, we have Spanish translation line if anyone needs translation. And that number is 718-550-0056. Por favor, si necesita traducción en español, llama 718-550-0056. And so, as a final reminder, because we had translation, please speak at a pace a little slower than I am. I'm a little nervous, so as to support our translators in doing their work. And now we begin. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Shaun. Hey, joining the Ladies Club.
You don't sound nervous at all.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me know that. Okay, so our first question for the day is, actually, I'm just going to say the order first. So the order is going to be Shaun, then Kathryn, then Dianne, and then Maya. And then we're going to do another order for the next question. The first question is, what is your vision for the future of New York City, specifically as it relates to youth, Black and Brown youth, LGBTQ plus youth, youth with disabilities, undocumented youth, and other marginalized young people? And why should young people in these communities support your candidacy? Starting with Shaun.
Well, Marcia, thank you so much for having me for this amazing forum you've organized today. And my own commitment to young people in the city begins with my own childhood growing up in New York. I saw homelessness exploding on our streets, neighborhoods suffering, and I asked myself, how can it be in the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country on earth we allow kids to sleep on our streets? And so I started volunteering in a homeless shelter. I went to work when I came back from school with leaders like Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood and Ana Vincente in central Brooklyn and the South Bronx, making sure that kids, every kid, no matter what they look like, who they love, who they worship, the color of their skin, what language they speak, every kid could have a decent chance at opportunity. And that's what I've done my entire career. So my vision begins, first of all, with appointing the very first chief equity officer in this history of the city, reporting directly to the mayor to make sure that equity is at the forefront of every single policy. It also goes to creating 15-minute neighborhoods so that every kid in this city has within 15 minutes of their front door everything they need to succeed in life, so that we can no longer predict the life chances, even the lifespan of a child by the zip code that they grow up in. That's just wrong. And it includes equity bonds, which means that every child born in this city would get $1,000, and then each year up to 2,000 more. So by the time they graduated high school, they would have as much as $50,000 in an account to have a true chance to succeed in New York City.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathryn, your turn.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me and for all the work that you put in to your policy paper. It's pretty amazing. So I want to congratulate you on that. You know, I was born and raised in Brooklyn in a multiracial family. You know, I was adopted, as were two of my siblings. And one of them actually spent 7 years in the foster care system. And so I understand deeply the impact that institutionalization can have on kids. And I'm running because I want to see kids have real opportunity, not only in ensuring that they have strong educational foundations, but jobs as they come out of CUNY or vocational school, so that they can then fulfill their dreams and raise their own families here. And so I have put together a plan to really discuss how we make it fair, how we really increase the number of community schools. But I do want to talk a little bit about two populations that I think are particularly at risk. Those are kids who are in homeless shelters. We know that having a safe, stable home means that you're more successful in school, that you will be more successful, you will be happier, you will be healthier, you will have better mental health. And the second piece I want to talk about is the LGBTQ plus community, because they often end up being the largest portion of our runaway program. And they need services to support them to make sure that they can thrive. And so that is why I'm running for mayor. I want to make sure this is a livable city for everyone, and particularly for our young people, because I want you to stay.
Thank you. So we heard 15-minute city, we heard livable city, and also thank you for the specific answers to different young people and their demographics. Now we're going to go to Dianne.
Hi, all. Thank you so much. I am so thrilled to be here as the true community candidate that has made it this far as a result of the power of youth organizing. I am also a proud mother of two young adults, both of whom had learning differences in the public school system in New York. And I am the only candidate in this race who's actually been an educator in the New York City public school system, for better or for worse. I am also a member of New Yorkers for Racially Just Public Schools. And I want to just take a quick minute to honor and thank all of our Black educators, many of whom continue to serve as essential workers in this thankless city so many times. So for too long, you know, I believe that our Black students and families have been provided with the bare minimum at best. That quality for Black children in this school system is more than just, or should be more than just, Black History Month internships or pipelines. Quality should be transforming a system that was founded upon a history that once declared it illegal for a Black person to read and called for the death of anyone who taught a Black person to read. The true purpose of education should be to help foster critical thinking skills so that our young people can do exactly like some of the things that you're doing today. And I believe that that requires systemic change, and that this is a moment for us to take on that kind of transformation. Perfect.
You hit the mark. You hit the mark, exactly.
Thank you, Dianne. And now going to Maya.
Well, thank you. It's also a pleasure to be here. And let me just start by saying, as someone who went to a segregated elementary school when I was young, who also watched my best friend disappear because of gentrification, even though her mother worked really long hours, couldn't afford the rent when it was increased. You know, I became a civil rights lawyer, and I've spent my entire career doing racial justice work, but with a vision that is very much consistent with the platform that you've set out, because, you know, not just for myself, but for my best friend Charlene, who disappeared, for the schools that did not serve us, for the disinvestment that we experienced in our community, that I have seen my own two daughters who were 20 and 17, went to our neighborhood elementary school and watched and navigated them through elementary school, but also middle school and high school in the public system, that it is clear that we have to have a city where we can all live with dignity. And that means that we, all of us, all of our children are seen as exceptional by our public school system. And that we follow the 5 R's of Integrate NYC and other groups that we adopted as part of the School Diversity Advisory Group, that we have development without displacement, that we have counselors, not cops, in our schools, because we're actually providing a student safety net. And that's a vision that I'm going to make sure happens as mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot to dig into today. And so I'm excited about furthering a lot of the things that we're further conversing about a lot of the things that you offered. But we are going to go to our first youth question, because some of those things are going to come up in these questions. And so our first question is about youth power. And the work of every youth organizing space is to build youth power, is to build up youth, amplify youth voices, support youth in getting into positions of leadership, and in so doing, democratizing power itself. We believe that the closest to the problem are the best equipped to solve it. And this is why our Education Justice Forum is led by young people. And so our first question is coming from Youth Power Coalition. Sophie, you got it.
Well, thanks so much, Marcia. Oh, hi, everyone. I'm so grateful for this platform. My name is Sophie Zhu. I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm with the Youth Power Coalition. I also just want to say I really appreciate candidates' experiences with community organizing. Okay, I'll just head on to the question now. The question is, building youth power in the Department of Education and city overall is mandatory for the future success of New York City as a leading city in the US. What do youth power, youth leadership, and youth voice look like when you are mayor? What are your tangible goals for realizing youth power and leadership in your administration? And how will you center youth at decision-making tables? Lastly, how will you hold yourself accountable to meeting youth needs, and how will youth work to do the same? Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. So the order for this question is Maya, Shaun, Kathryn, and Dianne. So Maya, you can start.
Well, thank you, Sophie. I love that question. And one of the things we did as the School Diversity Advisory Group was make sure Teens Take Charge and Integrate NYC had a voice at the table. We used the 5 R's that because we wanted to incorporate that youth voice in designing the recommendations we designed. And I, as mayor, would make sure there was a youth vote on the PEP, on CECs, and that there was an actual youth advisory group inside Department of Education, so that we were also advancing all the different levels and layers in which we have to have youth voice, but really with a tangible metrics, right, that is measurable, so that part of it is that we're staying accountable, and that I'm staying accountable and my administration to the outcomes that we're supposed to be producing. Because so often it becomes like a bean counting, where we say, you know, a checklist where we say we tick off the things we said we would do without paying attention to whether or not it makes the change we agreed to make. And so a big part of that accountability is about transparency about what impacts are happening. That's also in summer youth employment programs and making sure that youth are helping to design that. That's also thinking about how we innovate in our education system. We have blown the boxes flattened, right? COVID flattened it. That can be a real opportunity to doing things differently. And that's how I'll lead, but with youth having a voice around what that looks like.
Thank you, Maya. Shaun?
Thank you, Sophie. And I couldn't agree more about the power of organizing. In fact, when I was a student myself, I read about the East Brooklyn congregations, Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood, the incredible work they were doing on the Nehemiah Plan. And I literally came to him and I said, put me to work. And he sent me to 10-day organizing training. And I came back and worked for a nonprofit that was helping them build and rebuild Brownsville, East New York, all of those communities through the power of community organizing. So I understand, as Bishop Youngblood said to me many years ago, there are two forms of power: organized people and organized money. And so I agree with Maya about organizing people, and particularly youth. We do need to give real accountability and power on the PEP and the CECs. That's an important step forward. But I also know that a budget is the measure of our values. I was President Obama's budget director over the $4 trillion budget, and I fundamentally understand that the only way we're going to change the equation is to put more power for the money that goes into the system at the hands of our students. And so what I would do through participatory budgeting is devolve real funding to the PEP and to the CECs to be able to make decisions that profoundly impact the day-to-day experience that you have in the classroom, and the ways that our educational system really transforms the lives of our children across this city. And I also want to say, please, can you lend your timer to every other forum that we go to? Because it is the best one I've seen. We've done a lot.
We missed that last part, but yes to the lending of the timer. We definitely will share. I love that y'all can see it too, and thank you for all staying close to time, if not on time. Going to Kathryn.
Yeah, thank you for that question. You are the ones who are experiencing the education system. You are the ones who we are trying to serve. If you don't have a voice at the table, then we fundamentally aren't going to meet your needs. And so ensuring that you are at the table and part of the decision making at the PEP, at the CECs, but also within the Department of Ed fundamentally, that there is a seat at the table with the chancellor when policies are getting designed really matters. And the way that I manage and the way that I have managed for my entire career is you have to put people in place and then you have to hold them accountable. And you follow the data and you follow the information to know whether or not we are meeting your needs, whether or not we are providing you with the education and the opportunities and the critical thinking that are so critical in the 21st century. And we can measure that and really hold folks accountable, which is what I have done over and over again in all of my roles, whether or not it was delivering your drinking water or plowing your snow or working at NYCLU, is understanding what the mission is and ensuring that you are serving the person and the mission matches. And so I fundamentally will ensure that people and young people are at the table and have real power, because it is your voice that is so critical.
Thank you, Kathryn. And now going to Dianne.
Thank you. So let me just start off by saying that I have spent my career witnessing the strength of youth power and organizing, and I'm a big supporter and a big fan. I've spent the last 6 years in particular in the South Bronx working with young people both in schools and out of schools, hearing from them about the things that they did not think were working and what they needed, and helping to provide the resources to help them facilitate those kinds of change. I believe that young people do know the direction forward and really should be trusted with helping to determine the future. Students, our young people in schools, need to have a voice in their own education, and that should be represented and reflected at every level, from the local school level all the way up to the chancellor's office. I've had conversations with some youth organizers about whether or not we need to have a student chancellor in the city that is really sitting at the table and really reflecting the needs and what is missing for young people in our schools. We need to center our young people in restorative justice, in transformative justice in our schools. We need to actually allow for real voices, meaningful voices, in every structural level of the Department of Education. And I think that we also need to work together to create the positions and what that looks like, and take a look at the structures and hear from young people about what structures they want and what structures they need. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to do moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Dianne. And so the first follow-up question is actually going to go to Kathryn. So we hear a lot about like a seat at the table, accountability, transparency, centering young people. But on the ground, we also know that ageism in particular when it comes to young people, but other systems of oppression also take up a lot of space, and people make decisions about who gets a seat. And so I guess my abstract visioning question for you, Kathryn, is like, what does this table actually look like if you were mayor? And how will these seats be distributed with equity in mind, especially as it comes to, or as it relates to issues of young people?
So this is what happens every day in the world of government is that there are policy conversations that are based on sort of data where people come together from different points of view usually, but not usually with youth. And what it means to have a real voice at the table is that you are in the room and that you are part of almost the voting structure of how these policies get crafted. And I would look to organizations like yours to help identify who those people are that need to be at the table, because you are who we need to be serving. Your voice telling someone who's making a policy decision of how much you need to be in science or how much time you need to be in math. And you're saying, that's not helpful to me. Where is my arts program? Where is my music program? How are you making investments in these other pieces of my socio-emotional academic development that are so critical? That is something that I believe you could bring to the table that would be incredibly powerful. But I would look to youth organizations to help craft who it is who should be at the table, which member of which organization. And I also think it's sort of flexible. Sometimes it's a bigger group and sometimes it's a smaller group. And that is what I would do when I am mayor.
Thank you. And so to our first vote question, this is again a yes or no vote to this following question. And so we also, what Sophie hasn't mentioned is how much we talk about, led by young people, and Sophie in particular, how much we talk about like the lack of enfranchisement on city bodies with young people, right? So whether it's a school leadership team or the panel for education policy or various CECs, like there is a student there or two or three, but they often don't have voting power. And when they do, there are 3 young people to like 15 adults. So it's definitely not equitable considering there are 1.1 million New York City public school students. And so the vote question for today, yes or no again, is if elected, will you increase the number of student positions on decision-making bodies and student support-led efforts to transform DOE? Will you increase the number of students and will you support student-led efforts to transform DOE? Yes or no, starting with Maya.
Yes.
Shaun, you're on mute, but I feel like you said absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Kathryn?
Yeah.
And Dianne?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Sophie. Our next question is specifically about integration. And so I can imagine you know who it's coming from. But nonetheless, New York City is home to one of the most segregated school systems in America because of city's admissions processes for selective schools, among other issues. Furthermore, housing segregation, school zone lines have worked to entrench a divided school system that itself works to separate students by race and class as early as kindergarten. Our next question is about integration and from Integrate NYC. Thank you, Emma.
Hi, my name is Emma. My pronouns are her, she, like the chocolate bar. And I'm representing Integrate NYC. My question is that if we define integration as a process by which to better all schools and create educational equity, what does your school integration plan look like? What gatekeeping measures will you abolish? How will you transform all schools so that all students, especially BIPOC students, feel protected and as though their lives, cultures, and futures are prioritized?
Thank you again, Emma. Starting with Dianne, and then Maya, and then Shaun, and then Kathryn.
Great. So I really, really appreciate this question because as James Baldwin said, you can't teach children that you don't love. Something like that. I'm not paraphrasing it perfectly. And so I don't think that our schools are a place where our Black and brown children, our BIPOC students, feel seen, valued, loved, respected. And that is something that we need to take on head on. And part of that means that our kids, our students need to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. They need to see themselves reflected at the front of the classroom in terms of who is teaching them. And they need to feel that their experiences, their lived experiences and their communities are acknowledged and reflected in everything that is happening. So I think that's a critical part of beginning to move towards creating safe spaces for our students. I also have talked about removing police from schools. And in terms of real integration and moving towards that, we need to develop a really comprehensive school integration plan that involves reforming zoning, involves removing all barriers to access all screens. We should be looking at redrawing elementary school zones so that we can maximize integration, looking at the model of District 15 and how we could expand that. And really making sure that there's equity in terms of funding and that we are centering the voices of BIPOC communities so that they are driving in the process moving forward and that we're putting students first.
Thank you, Dianne. Maya?
Well, again, 5 Rs. We adopted them when I was one of the co-chairs of the School Diversity Advisory Group. I stand by that. That's everything from race and enrollment. So eliminating discriminatory admissions practices and policies. That is, obviously relationships. We've talked a lot about that. Representation. We've talked a lot about that. Restorative justice, agreeing with Dianne. And we also have to make sure we're putting counselors in our schools, not cops. We've talked about that, and all the things that the 5 Rs include. Look, I'm really proud that we have a gun violence prevention policy where we said very explicitly that we were going to create a restorative justice fund by taking $18 million from the New York City Police Department so the communities with gun violence could invest. And that includes things that the community can do outside of the schools, but in relationship to that policy, we also said that we're going to have trauma-informed care in schools, that we're going to make sure that we have CBT and DBT in schools because that therapy reduces violence and increases graduate by 50% and increases graduation rates by 20% if we give student supports and creating student support teams. That's also part of a process that is seeing restorative resources matters a ton, and we will have appropriate resources for the students that need it the most.
Thank you, Maya. And Shaun?
Thank you, Emma. And look, for me, as someone who has worked on issues of segregation and discrimination for my whole career, we have to recognize that the inequity in our city is rooted in our housing and neighborhoods as well as in our schools. And so I have an aggressive plan to make sure that we truly integrate our housing in our neighborhoods. And that will be one part of making sure that our school system is more equal as well. That's why, as Housing Secretary for President Obama, I led the way on ensuring we gave real meaning and teeth to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. It's why when Donald Trump still had a Twitter account last year, he was attacking my work by saying we were trying to destroy the suburbs by making sure that Black and brown people could live wherever they choose. And it's why we must have an aggressive policy on creating true fair housing in the city. In the education system, I want to agree with a lot of what Dianne and Maya said about stopping using screens and testing in ways that we know are discriminatory, and in ensuring that we get the police out of our schools. I agree on both of those. I would also say we need to make sure that the curriculum in our schools actually teaches the true history of this city and this country and the value of diversity. And we also need a much more diverse group of teachers that reflect our communities, both recruiting and retaining teachers of color to make sure that we have a more just education system.
Thank you, Shaun. And Kathryn.
It's hard to come up on the last with all these great answers. But You know, I fundamentally believe when you think about the education system that every school has to be a great school. You know, I was educated in the city's public school systems. I know that they can be great schools. And sometimes funny things happen. One of the schools profiled as a great school in the New York Times where everyone wanted to go to when I was growing up was like a terrible school. Nobody would go there. So we know that we can invest in schools to make sure that they are all fabulous and that they are really community schools. But first and foremost, we should not have tests for 4-year-olds. It is wrong to test a 4-year-old about whether or not they're gifted and talented. Instead, we should be making sure that there is enrichment in every elementary school. And particularly in this coming year when we know so many little kids experience trauma, that they need art and music and sports so that they have other outlets as well as counselors. But I also said that I would follow the District 15 model in Brooklyn, which eliminated middle school screens and has done it in a way that brought the community together rather than creating division across the city, where we are talking about a scarcity model rather than an inclusive model. And so I would see the mayoralty that I am running is focused on making sure that integration actually occurs and that we do it in a way that brings people together.
Thank you, Kathryn. And so the follow-up question is to Maya, right? Talk a bit about the 5 R's and reference in some respects like the SDAG, right? So the School Diversity Advisory Group. But we also know that a lot of the recommendations that were made were not instituted, right? And we also feel sometimes as though there's like a task force and then nothing happens. And so what happens to the recommendations made by this group when you potentially become mayor?
So look, when I become mayor, we follow the recommendations and I only have one caveat because I stand by those recommendations and feel very strongly about them. I was one of the best processes I've ever had the privilege of being a part of. I was really proud to be a part of it because it was a co-creation. We had co-chairs, but we had a true democratic process with all the stakeholders at the table. And it wasn't always easy. It was hard work. And we looked at data. We had public hearings in every single borough. We talked to over 1,000 folks. We even had a youth-focused public hearing specifically and organized by youth. But my only caveat is COVID, as I said, has flattened the box. So it's given us some opportunities we may not have seen when we develop those recommendations. So I stick by them. I will implement them but at the same time, be an active and transparent conversation in similar type processes so that we're not missing some things that might be really important opportunities to go faster, farther, and with more equity built in. So that's my only caveat is we might be able to do even more than we envisioned when we developed those recommendations before COVID. And I would also add that, one of the things that we knew before, and it's so clear now, is digital divide, something I worked on before City Hall, during City Hall, and I continue to work on.
Thank you. And we will talk about a number of the things that you mentioned. And so we're going to move now to the voting question. And the order will be Dianne, Maya, Shaun, and then Kathryn, same order. So if elected, will you abolish screening in schools and instead pursue transformative legislation to integrate all schools? Dianne?
Yeah. I guess I should say more than that.
It's the yes or no, but you can say more on that. 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's a yes. I mean, it's a no-brainer to me that we need to, in order to improve the quality of our schools and really address the equity issue, we have to integrate our schools. I think there's benefits both in terms of resources, but also in terms of social emotional learning. If we really want to get to the root of racism and white supremacy, we have to actually start educating our kids together in the same spaces and actually teach things to all students about all of the rest of us so that we begin to humanize those of us who for so long have not been seen as human and dehumanized by the system. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Maya, yes or no, but I'll also give everybody 30 seconds. If you already did.
Heck yeah.
Okay, cool. Shaun?
Heck yeah, too.
Okay, and Kathryn?
So as I've said before in many of these forums, I don't believe we should be talking about a scarcity model, and I would expand the number of high schools and actually use the University of Texas model, which is to take the top 10% from every middle school by grade point average. This has created diversity not only racially but also economically. But I would leave in place the Shazad exam.
Okay, so you would leave in place screening but use the UT model. Okay, thank you. So next question. There are clearly consequences to over-policing and criminalizing youth in schools and in our communities. Students, as a result of these consequences, don't feel as though their school is a place to learn, but rather a prison or a place in which their very ways of being are policed. Two interrelated important consequences of over-policing and criminalization are the school to prison pipeline and school push-up. Our next question is coming from the Urban Youth Collaborative and aims at getting to these very issues. And so, Jocelyn, take us away.
Hello, my name is Jocelyn Palafox. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a youth leader with Urban Youth Collaborative at Make the New York. Marginalized students are disproportionately pushed out or forced to have negative encounters with school police, as well as policing and surveillance culture. Knowing this, what student and community-led safety strategies and restorative justice approaches do you aim to institutionalize in New York City public schools once you are mayor? And do you believe that it is only with police-free schools that New York City can ensure equity? Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Starting with Dianne, and then Maya, and then Shaun, and then Kathryn.
So, I've been really loud about this issue for a long time in this campaign. I certainly don't think that police-free schools are the only mechanism to move towards equity. I do think it is a critical component and a critical first step towards bringing equity into our schools. Police-free schools are just a critical part of preventing the disproportionate and ongoing harm to our young people, especially our Black and Brown youth, who we know are expelled at 3 times the rate of their white peers, and 3 times more likely to face the juvenile justice system as a result. We can and need to invest in care of our young people, not the criminalization. And so I would look to involve our students in community-led sort of safety strategies, including restorative and transformative justice practices. I think that we also need to, move towards in-school support staff that can provide some of that support around low-level interventions with students and help to guide other students in that process. I've done that work as the executive director at The Door. We led community safety response teams that were a combination of staff and young people. And I think that in higher need crisis situations, we could draw upon the community first responders department that I've also called for, which would be non-police interventions and supports. And support staff in general need to be increased dramatically.
Thank you. Maya?
Yeah, and The Door is such a great program. Look, we have to make sure that we have social workers in every school, that we are increasing the number of school psychologists. I've already said explicitly in our gun violence prevention platform, we have a whole focus on making sure we have trauma-informed care in schools. But I believe and support and will create a student support model, because so many times that we have students who are being treated as disciplinary problems. Really, they're the first indication of problems. They're often not their fault, that need intervention and solution, problem solving, support. So the other opportunity we have, in addition to the school support teams, is expanding on the community school model, so that there are partnership with community-based institutions that are deep partnerships also with the school, but also treating the whole family as a unit. When my daughter was in first grade, a kid threatened to bring a knife to school and stab her. Yes, he was a young Black boy. The school responded with support, and he was a different kid. She spent the next 5 years in school with that kid, never had another problem with him. And it was the difference between a support model versus a punitive model. And that's what I will make sure we have. But I also want to say that the restorative justice model includes the participatory justice fund for communities, because again, we also need safe street corridors. We need community-based partnerships for kids going to and coming from school, but all with an intervention support model.
Thank you. Shaun?
First, can I just say, listening to the birds in your background makes me feel like I am outside. So thank you, despite being locked in my Zoom box all day.
No
So
problem.
thank you for
She's
that.
trying to be a part of this conversation, like she's really
Yeah, yeah. Empower our birds too, as well as our youth. So look, I've been very clear that we need to get the police out of our schools. And I would absolutely do that as mayor. I've also been clear that it's about a broader culture of making our schools feel like prisons, with whether it's metal detectors or many other aspects that go beyond just the presence of police in schools that needs to end. But what's most critical, as I think others have talked about, is what do we actually replace the police with? And so my proposal is what I call PPARs, that are coordinators that really are trained to focus on restorative justice, to focus on the mental health and emotional well-being of students, and really get to violence as an underlying public health problem and really going to the roots of it. It's also why I've proposed that we add 150 social workers to our schools. And it's why I have, I think, a really innovative model that I call the Education Recovery Corps. We know how hard this past year has been for every one of you. And we know that it's not just the educational loss, it is the social and emotional trauma that we have all been through as New Yorkers, and particularly in communities that were disproportionately victims of COVID. And so ensuring that we put our young people to work in paid positions side by side with our teachers to focus not just on academic recovery, but also on social and emotional recovery is what my Education Recovery Corps would do. And it's critical at a time where young people can use jobs too, paid jobs, to help us rebuild. And so that's a key part of my plan too.
And then Kathryn.
Thank you. We know that oftentimes violence is the symptom of underlying issues that are going on with that child, with that family, which may be indicators of that there is issues on the housing front, or they've lost a family member. I mean, in COVID, 1 in 1,000 kids has lost a parent or guardian in New York City. It's somewhat of a horrifying statistic. This means that going into next year, teachers and principals, as well as social workers, need to be having conversations all the time to identify early indications of trauma and talking about so-and-so showing up, they never show up with their homework, what's going on. So-and-so shows up and they're really angry every time they walk down, or really aggressive, what's going on. This is a sign that, like, before we even get there, let's identify these precursors. And those conversations don't usually happen. And it is absolutely critical, particularly in this coming year, that those conversations are happening so that we can identify those traumas that folks have been experiencing over the course of this last year. And so I believe that school safety is part of that, but it is also to make sure that everyone feels safe in school and feels protected in school, and that it is not a punitive process.
Thank you. The follow-up question is to Shaun. And so I appreciate you naming like public health and like thinking about things as public health issues and not just punishing and supporting punishment culture. And I appreciate that, because we don't often, like when we talk about violence, we talk about interpersonal violence often, about people violating other people. And we don't think about like poverty or miseducation or subjugation as other sources of violence and like real forms of violence in our communities. And so I would love if you could talk more about the PPAR model, and knowing, of course, that there's going to be space to talk about education recovery, talking more about the PPAR model and be more explicit, if you will, about the ways that disrupts the school to prison pipeline.
Well, first, I want to say that you are so right about all of the different, and I've seen this most especially in my career through issues around housing and homelessness. When I was housing commissioner in the city, we ran a first of its kind pilot in the country where we gave housing vouchers to folks coming out of Rikers. And the results of just decent housing were transformational. A year later, 95% of those folks were stably housed, getting back to work, hadn't reoffended. And so it's a very direct point, Marcia, about what you're saying, which is that if you attack those underlying causes, you really can get to the roots of this issue. And so on the PPARS model, first of all, what we would do is, rather than training as we do with police in militarization, in violence, we are actually training in mental health challenges, in positivity, in respect, and how to do mediation in ways that could really, and I thought Maya's example about her daughter was powerful, that if you can actually get to those underlying causes, bring people together, and have trained professionals that understand both the underlying mental health and other challenges, but also can really mediate in these situations in ways that engage students rather than punitively punish them, I think you really get to the core of what these issues are.
Thank you. And so the vote question, yes or no vote in the interest of time. But the question is pretty straightforward. So it's easier, I guess, to give a yes or no vote. If elected, will you make sure New York City schools are police-free schools in the ways that grassroots organizers mean police-free schools and not always the city council? So if elected, will you make sure that New York City schools are police-free schools? Starting with Dianne.
Yes.
Thank you. Maya?
Yes.
Shaun?
Yes.
Kathryn?
I'd retain school safety.
Okay, thank you for the clarity on that one. Okay, so moving to the next question. For us, safety is having well-resourced communities in which people's lives not only matter, but in which people themselves thrive, all people, and especially marginalized people in this context. This vision of safety necessarily has to go beyond policing. It cannot just be about police, because we also know that in marginalized communities, police don't always keep people safe. So our question now is going to come from Girls for Gender Equity, and it invites you to reimagine safety alongside us. So Sophia, you got it.
Hello, my name is Suswella Daly. I'm representing Girls for Gender Equity. And my question is, if you were mayor, what does safety beyond policing entail for New York City public schools? And how will you ensure the safety of undocumented students?
Awesome. And the order for this is Kathryn, then Dianne, Maya, and Shaun.
Policing, public safety and safety at school has to go beyond police. They certainly are not the core piece of how you keep a school safe. It is about creating the culture at that school, but it is also ensuring that what we've talked about before, that people have home lives that are stable, meaning they have a home, first and foremost, because housing heals, housing allows you to get the education that you need, that there is broadband for every kid. It is still horrifying to me that it took till January for people to even have devices in a year in which we'd been remote for months and months and months. That there are activities so important for kids to not only have, reading, writing, arithmetic, but also sports and music and art as part of that. And I was out this morning at food pantries. The need for food, just for the basics, the need for food. If you are not well fed, if your family is not well fed, it is the same part of your brain that is looking for food that is going to have to do critical thinking and retain new information. You can't learn if you're hungry. And that is absolutely critical. But going forward, you need experiences. You need to have paid internships that allow you to experience other aspects and what a future might look like. It's very hard to imagine being a doctor if you've never met a doctor, or being a construction worker if you've never met a construction worker. Hopefully you've all met teachers, so you know what that would look like. But that's how I would envision really ensuring safety is about actually investing in community.
Dianne?
Thanks. So safety is not just about the removing of police and the decriminalization of our schools and our students. It's also the proactive presence and ensuring of care and support, what our young people really need to thrive, which starts with a process of healing. We really need to fully decriminalize our schools and decriminalize our young people by getting rid of anything that has to do with surveillance or monitoring, like the metal detectors and the zero tolerance and suspensions. All of those things cause harm to our students. We need to, in fact, replace those things instead with expanded access to counselors, to social workers, to a range of supportive services that we know that our students need, school-based health clinics. Those are the types of things that we need to provide in lieu of so that our students can begin to thrive. Insofar as our undocumented students, we really need to completely disengage any kind of further collaboration between ICE and our city agencies, the NYPD, the DOE. We need to ensure that we rebuild trust with our undocumented communities and our undocumented students by making sure that we are protecting them and supporting them and requiring that our staff know that they are not to collaborate with ICE in any way, and really making sure that our community-based providers are also part of the partnership and at the table. I'll stop there because I see the time.
We're all being very compliant. Sometimes we're not good in other forums.
All the way.
So I agree with so much of what Dianne said. I want to actually flip it on its head and say, how are we making every single one of our schools welcoming places? Because that is central to safety, is not just that it's the absence of something that makes us unsafe, but it's the welcoming. And that's everything from cultural responsive pedagogy, as we talked about earlier. That is, teachers who look like our students. That is a place where you walk in the building, you and your family are welcome. That also where our schools are also centers for the community, where so much of what we need, families can get there. Family Health Center is one example. My own daughter's school, it was where we had like at least one person said we had 157 languages in my daughter's elementary school, which if you include indigenous languages is probably true. But the thing is, it was a place where parents could come twice a week in the mornings and go to the cafeteria and get English as a second language. It was a place and a center for the community, not just a place for learning to be tested. So in addition to all the other things we talked about, from social emotional supports, but it's culturally responsive, it's representational, it's students being seen as their own leaders, being supported to be peer-to-peer mediators. But I will also say that it is essentially important that the leadership of our schools are actually held accountable to producing that type of welcoming environment. And that has to be a success metric for education, and I would make it so.
Thank you. And last, Shaun.
As Kathryn said, it's hard to go last after so many good ideas, but I do want to add a few thoughts about this issue of what true safety means. And I guess I want to expand it beyond the importance of so many things we've talked about changing our schools, building on the model of community schools, to talk about our neighborhoods and our communities. And what we need to do is reorient our criminal justice system more broadly to end the school to prison pipeline. I don't know if you know, we spend over $400,000 per prisoner per year in our corrections system right now, and we get terrible results. So I would propose to completely reorient the system to have a pretrial agency that does everything it can to divert from incarceration. I would take $500 million per year in the first 2 years and $3 billion a year by the end of my first term, and reinvest it from our criminal justice system into community-based solutions. I talked about the housing model I created when I was housing commissioner. We know that those work. I would reopen libraries 24/7, and I would create what I call 15-minute communities, which is that every student has within 15 minutes of their front door everything they need: for success. Not only a great school, but fresh food, the healthcare that they need, a park to play in, transportation to get around quickly, not to take hours to get to school. All of those things have to be part of the way we plan our communities and make them truly equitable.
Thank you. I have all these questions in my head, but I can only ask one. And so the next question, the follow-up question rather, is going to go to Dianne. And it's effectively just an invitation to speak more about what undocumented New Yorkers can expect from your New York City when you are mayor, or if you're possibly mayor. And specifically, if you can expand a bit more about how you will ensure that we completely disengage with collaboration with ICE, because we know that ICE, as well as the NYPD, are effectively terrorizing forces in all of our communities, especially when undocumented folks are people of color, Black and Latinx specifically. If you can share more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, let me just, it's very simple on some level for me. As mayor, I'm the boss. And those, NYPD reports to me. And, the commissioner reports to me and gets chosen by me. And it has to be really crystal clear that they are to, adhere by and execute on and implement the vision that we have co-created, the community with me in City Hall, right? And part of that is critical in terms of the values around protecting all New Yorkers, documented or otherwise. And so, that requires both clarity in terms of direction and also accountability in terms of follow-up, right? So any kind of, lack of adherence to what the expectations are would result in immediate and swift consequences to anyone from the NYPD who would fail to do as was required, and also the intervention on the other side, right? In terms of taking care of and protecting anyone who might be harmed as a result of that, right? We can't just sort of like throw up our hands and pretend that there's nothing that we can do about it. We need to come together and ensure that we are protecting all of our neighbors, no matter what. And that is a commitment that I have made and will execute on and follow through on as mayor of New York City.
Thank you. And so to the voting question, the question order is Kathryn, Dianne, Maya, and Shaun. And the question is, if elected, will you help to make New York City schools and communities ICE free, as in no collaboration with ICE, no ICE, ICE gone, ICE free, or as someone said yesterday, ICE is melted. If elected, will you help to make sure that New York City schools and communities are ICE free? Kathryn?
Yes, and no, I'm older than you, so all I can hear in my head is ice, ice, baby.
Okay, definitely not that. Definitely
really embarrassed, but no, they would not be part of that. No, get rid of them.
Dianne?
ICE will be gone.
Maya?
Absolutely not. And I apologize because it's 5:30 and I unfortunately have another event, but I've so enjoyed this one, so well organized, and thank you all.
Thank you for being with us, Maya. And Shaun?
Yes, ice free, and take care, Maya.
Maya, do you have any closing words you want to offer?
Well, look, just that this forum has been so important. Leadership has been so important from all of the groups. I've had the great good fortune to learn from all of you. Big shout out also to Girls for Gender Equity, because centering women and girls is also critically important for any administration, let alone the next one. But I look forward to partnering with all of you on making this vision a reality. So thank you.
Thank you, and take care.
Thank you.
Okay, so everybody voted. Awesome. So to the next question. And thank you, Suswella. And so, yes, learning, as we have already mentioned a number of times, learning in the COVID era has proven difficult for most students. And I'm saying most to be kind. Most students. Students report issues with internet access to a computer, or having to share a computer with all in the household. They report difficulties with required learning modalities that teachers are employing, or excess homework because teachers are not seeing them in like physical class time. Students have also had to deal with added familial responsibilities, and also, most importantly, familial loss. It is safe to say that many marginalized students have struggled as a result of this and more. We have a question from NYCLU Teen Activist Project that will address specifically post-COVID learning. And the order will be Shaun, Kathryn, and Dianne. Stephanie, take this away.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Chapman, pronoun she, her, hers. I'm a member of NYCLU's Teen Activist Project. And so this pandemic has exacerbated existing inequalities in our city. Regarding learning and access to vaccines and testing, what will you do to ensure student success after 1.5 school years in the COVID-19 pandemic, during which learning and access to technologies were deprioritized and resources for students with disabilities were at best severely limited? What do schools look like if you become mayor in a post-COVID New York City?
Thank you, Stephanie. Shaun?
Thank you, Stephanie. And this is such a powerful question. And to be honest, I think if we'd had the right leadership going into this crisis, we not only could have opened our schools this September, but we could have opened them focusing on the students who are so often left behind, knowing that we would have had fewer students in the classroom if we'd really prioritized dual language learners, children with disabilities, our homeless kids, and others. We could have actually used this moment to close the huge divides in our school system rather than widen them. But unfortunately, we are where we are. And this has to be the most critical focus for the next mayor starting in January. And what does that mean? That means, as I said, significantly more investment in all of the things that will help to rebuild not just the academic, but social and emotional success of our students. My Education Recovery Corps would actually hire young people who we hope would end up being teachers in our schools to work side by side with our teachers on both the academic and the social and emotional recovery. But it also means much more than that. It means really investing in the technology and opportunities for students. It means opening our libraries 24/7 in communities and investing so that every single student would have the opportunity for internships and paid jobs, summer and otherwise, that we know are going to be critical to the economic recovery as well as the social and emotional recovery.
Thank you. Kathryn?
I think everyone on this panel and actually across the city knows how hard the next year is going to be for our children and for our youth. And as Shaun said, schools for little kids and for kids with disabilities should have been open last fall. I believe that could have been done safely. My sister is a special ed teacher in the public school system. She went back to work. She was willing to go back to work. She wanted to be with her kids when they finally were allowed in. But this is going to be such a challenging time, not only academically, but also social, emotional. And I've talked a little bit about the fact that we need to ensure that principals and teachers are talking about what's happening in the classroom, that they are getting involved early and often to identify what the underlying issues are. But we also know that our high school kids can help tutor our younger kids and speed them up and accelerate their reading, which is the most critical piece, because if you have an inability to read by the time you're in third grade and you have to read for information, you will be continuously behind. But also when we get towards May, it is likely to expand vaccines to young people, at least to our older teenagers. And there needs to be a plan to make sure that you are getting the vaccine so that you can stay safe and actually be part of a more in-person learning as we go forward. That is going to be critical moving into next year.
Thank you. And Dianne?
Okay, I have so much to say about this. I'm going to try to keep it to time. The first thing I'm going to say is that the New York City public school systems have been failing the large majority of our students from day one, and so it's challenging to get into this sort of needs Olympics in terms of which population is needier than the other, though I do understand that students with learning disabilities and homeless students and other students deal with unique challenges. That being said, I think the first thing that we need to do is to focus on the health, the mental health and social emotional health of our students. We're not prepared for the challenge that this crisis has created on adults and our students, and we need to be prepared to make schools the places where we can begin to deal with that and create spaces of caring and healing for our young people. The other thing I'll say is that we should have done this last spring. All of our communities are rich with cultural institutions, community-based institutions, arts institutions. We should have annexed and deputized those spaces to provide in-person experiences for our students, which would have increased the square footage in terms of social distancing, increased access to technology and infrastructure, increased access to the staff at those locations, most of whom have some experience in terms of education adjacent at least, and could have also provided social emotional supports to our students, while at the same time we could have provided a pipeline to people from the community to serve in supportive roles in those classroom settings. That's what we should have done, and that's how we would start moving forward when I become mayor, because we won't be done with this COVID crisis yet.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. The follow-up question is to Kathryn. We can all note what went wrong, and then you started to expand a bit on all the things that went wrong in the last year. But can you share what you would have done differently, especially as it relates to marginalized students, and specifically in this regard, homeless students, BIPOC students, and students with disabilities?
Yeah, so first you start planning the day you closed the schools last March. You don't wait and act like September doesn't happen when September happens, because September comes around every year the same time. So you had months to, one, get the buildings in shape, have them ready, to have worked really closely with your principals and your teachers so that they understood what your kids needed. You should have had devices. I mean, honestly, by summertime, there should have been devices being distributed to every single kid in the public school system. You should have been planning for both in-person and remote, because who knew what the virus would have been like? It could have been worse. But you should have had really deep training for teachers on how to do remote learning. Not you figure out how you're going to do Stuart Little on a computer with kindergartners. So you could have had a whole library. You talk about opportunity. Who's the best biology teacher in the city of New York? Why didn't we have them put a whole library of classes together before September even started? And then we would have, my focus when we knew what the virus was about was that the elementary school kids and the kids with special needs and those who didn't have anywhere to learn at home should have used all of the space in the schools. If we had to be 6 feet apart, we had to be 6 feet apart. We should have used all the space and gotten them in 5 days a week.
And so the vote question is, if elected, and this is because a number of issues, as we've already discussed, have come up regarding learning in the COVID era, but also because a number of the students on this call, Stephanie and a number of the students who've already spoken and who will speak, have shared that they just don't feel like people are listening to them and their needs. They feel like people are, and administrators especially, are expecting them to pretend that this is normal, that like people aren't dying, that the world isn't on fire, that January 6th didn't happen, that like so much is unpredictable, and that doesn't help them as learners. And so the question is, if elected, will you prioritize student and youth needs in a post-COVID New York? Yes or no? Starting with Shaun.
Absolutely.
Kathryn?
Absolutely.
And Dianne?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, we have 2 more questions. Next question. While the city's latest recorded graduation rate is 77.3%, the graduation rates of students who are Black, Latinx, English language learners, and or students with disabilities are much lower. Our city has to create ways for all learners to succeed and graduate at excellent levels. And to do this, we will need to address issues of access. Our next question comes from a representative of the Children's Defense Fund, Sandy.
Hi, my name is Sandy. I'm a Beat the Odds advocate and scholar at the Children's Defense Fund, New York. What I wanted to address is, what do you think is working in our schools right now? How will you fix what isn't working? What will you do specifically to address these issues of technology and language access for families, comprehensive sex education for students, and student grievance process regarding teachers, staff, school police, and administration? Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. And the order is Kathryn, Dianne, and Shaun.
So I know that New York City public schools can be great. This has been an incredibly difficult year. There have been a lot of missteps. But the way that I would take us forward and make it so that we are actually not just asking for kids to be at grade level. Our vision is too low. How are we maximizing that? How are we ensuring that we are also understanding that kids learn differently? Some are very visual learners, some are very audio learners, and that we are designing our curriculum to take that into account. You know, that we are engaging with them on different fronts as we go forward. But on the technology front, I think we need to pretend like we're still in COVID in that. Make sure everybody has a device and everyone has broadband access, even if they're back in the classroom, because it is imperative for your education. We have to engage parents and ensure that we have both bilingual education, which I actually think is an advantage, not a disadvantage, but that the parents also are getting literacy training. The biggest predictor about success in school is if your mom is literate. And to the extent that we can make more moms literate, I'm sorry, dads, but that's just the stats. The more we make moms literate, the more successful their kids are. And I've always believed in comprehensive sex education in school. It is incredibly important that everyone have the facts as we move forward.
Thank you. Dianne?
Sandy, can I ask you to please repeat your question? My ADD kicked in and I didn't hear past the technology. So would you mind?
Yes, what will you specifically do to address the issues of technology and language access for families, comprehensive sex education for students, and student grievance process regarding teachers, staff, school police, and administration?
Okay, great. So let's do the technology and the language access. I've already talked about how I think we should be using other anchor institutions in communities as resources for students and families to be able to access technology. I also think that we need to prioritize and ensure that every household has access to technology and public broadband. That's also something that I've talked about. On the language piece, I believe that we should be hiring people in the city that work for the city, that work for the Department of Education, who are native speakers of all of the languages that are represented. We can't be using that Google Translate thing. We actually have to use real people who can speak in real terms to our communities, to our families. In terms of school student voice, I've talked about this. Students should be represented at every level of leadership in the Department of Education and should actually be part of the decision making. There's not going to be any police in school, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. But in terms of the other issues, you should be represented and at the table in terms of decision making. So that is something that students and young people will have a voice in the decision-making process. Did I catch it all? I think I did. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Shaun?
Sandy, hard to do justice to this question in 90 seconds. And no wonder Dianne had to ask again. There's a lot that you're asking about in here. Each piece of this is so important. And I do want to start by saying, there is nothing wrong with New York that can't be solved by what's right with New York. We have models for successful schools, for student leadership, for technology that's working, but that none of them have had leadership at City Hall and at the Department of Education that has truly scaled them to the scale of our challenges. And that's what we need to do, whether it's on technology, where we not only need to focus on getting devices and access, we need them to be affordable, because the single biggest barrier for most kids and families isn't that their apartment isn't wired, it's that the service is deeply unaffordable to get the speeds and to be able to actually have 4 people at a time in an apartment or more accessing data and technology in ways that we need to. I have a plan that would make sure we do that to every single New Yorker. And in the meantime, ensure that every library is open 24/7 and that we have the community spaces that we need that ensure access to technology while we're building out universal broadband. Critically important. I would ensure our access by expanding, creating 450 new dual language programs across the city. And I see I'm out of time. And so I knew I wasn't going to do justice to this question. I'm sorry, but thank you. Thank you for asking about such critical things.
Actually, you are not yet out of time, because the follow-up question goes to you. And if you could continue, but also expand a bit more about grievance processes for students and families in DOE or external to DOE, what would that look like if you were mayor?
Yeah, so I guess I want to continue just a little bit and say something a little more personal, which is that, you know, my dad grew up in Costa Rica and Lima, Peru. His first language was Spanish. He came to the US to get an education like so many immigrants. And it's really critically important, not just that we expand dual language programs and expand the way we communicate in every single issue in our schools to ensure that it's inclusive, but it's also critically important that we go beyond that to ensure that those who are so often left behind because of their immigration status have access. I have a true public option in healthcare that I'm proposing so that everyone would be covered and have true healthcare, primary care, prenatal care, all of the things that they need. And my 15-minute neighborhood would make sure that there's actually access to those services within your community. And so all of those, I think, are critically important in terms of ensuring that second language and other folks throughout our school system are getting what they need. On the issue of discipline and grievances, look, we have to be very clear that we have built a system where we are victimizing those who are already being victimized by the challenges that we have in our school system, particularly around COVID. And so we need to do a much better job of ensuring that we are not using punitive practices consistently in schools across this city. And I'm sorry, I'll stop.
Thank you for that. So the vote question is specifically about grievance processes, so we get to learn a bit more here in the vote. So yes or no again, and the question is, if elected, will you ensure that students have a transparent and impactful process by which to address their grievances with our city and with our schools? Again, if elected, will you ensure that students have a transparent and impactful process to address their grievances with our cities and our schools? First person is Kathryn.
Yes.
Dianne.
Absolutely.
And Shaun.
Yep.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, candidate. And so our last question is coming to you from the Brotherhood Sister Soul, and we begin. Remote learning and pandemic uncertainty have increased anxiety and depression among our city's 1.1 million public school students and our city overall, but particular to our students. Our students have been navigating tough conditions for mental health for a long time, pre-COVID, obviously. Additionally, our schools currently have more school safety agents than social workers and guidance counselors combined. While the city plans on deploying 150 more social workers, it is clear that that will not be enough. The National Association of Social Workers suggests a 1-to-50 ratio of social workers to students when students are coming from marginalized communities. And we are well beyond that at present. Our next question is about mental health and will come to you from Emanuela of the Brotherhood Sister Soul.
Hello, I'm Emanuela, she, her, hers, and I'm 15 and Border hostess or so. And the question will be, we want an increase on the budget for NYC public schools, so as dramatically increase the number of student support staff, guidance counselors, career counselors, college counselors, therapists, social workers, nurses, and more. To do this, elected officials need to institute a student support staff to student ratio of no greater than 1 to 100, and then match this action with appropriate funds. What will you do to center the social emotional wellness of students? What kinds of staff and support will you ensure all students have access to in NYC public schools?
The order is Dianne, Shaun, and Kathryn.
I love this question. So I'm going to get rid of all the police in schools, and we're going to use that money to fund the positions that you need. We're going to fund counselors. We're going to fund social workers. We're going to fund your clinics. We're going to fund all sorts of culturally responsive education. We're going to get you the supports that you need, because we know that safety and thriving and being healthy means having access to all of those types of services and supports that you need. We're going to fund it through the city budget by giving 100% of the allocated dollars to the schools, as opposed to looking first to the DOE to make cuts when we're trying to balance the rest of the city budget. We're going to fund it by going to Albany and making sure that the Fair Student Funding Formula and the Campaign for Fiscal Equity gives us what we deserve and what they owe us. We're going to stand up to the bully in Albany and make sure that we get the money that we need. And we're going to do that in partnership with the newly elected state Senate majority. And we're also going to advocate at the state level, at the federal level, to make sure that we are getting the type of funding that we need. So we're going to take care of ensuring that our students get everything that they need in order to thrive, because we also know that our students can't learn if they're hungry, if they're struggling with mental health, if they are, dealing with any kinds of other challenges. And we need to make sure that we're creating the environment that enables all of our students to thrive. And that's how we're going to do that.
Thank you. Shaun?
So absolutely, we need to better use the money that's already going into our schools to fund policing and reallocate that to the 150 more social workers. And on top of that, the PPAR coordinators that I talked about and the Education Recovery Corps, all three of which would be fundamentally aimed at dealing with the social and emotional challenges of this past year and the challenges that were there even before COVID hit. So absolutely, that critical investment needs to be there. But we should also know that we're not always going to catch these issues at school, and that we need to have a real mental health infrastructure in our communities as well. What if there's a mental health challenge in the middle of the night and when you're at home? We need to make sure, as I said in my 15-minute neighborhoods, that everyone has access within 15 minutes of their door to the healthcare that they need. And that includes 24/7 emergency mental health services that are in every community. And part of the way we're going to fund that is by ensuring through my chief equity officer that every time we invest in a health clinic, every time we make any kind of city investment, it's being done equitably. And then the last thing I would say is you may not know this, New York sends $23 billion more to Washington each year than we get back in return. We need a mayor who can finally make sure that New York City is getting its fair share of federal money. Nobody's in a better position, given the work that I've done for President Obama and now President Biden, to make sure that we get the resources we deserve for healthcare and so many other things.
Thank you. And Kathryn?
So, as I've said, we know that this is going to be a traumatic year for students. It's already been challenging before COVID on the mental health front, on not diagnosing sort of that barrier to education. As I've said at the beginning, I absolutely believe that we need to have more counselors and nurses and support within schools, that we also need art and music and sports, because not every kid's going to want to talk. And I had a kindergartner during 9/11. And literally they spent the whole entire year making buildings with planes going into them. But that was how those little kids worked through it. And we need to give people options in how they're going to address the many traumas that have happened. But I do believe that we need to make sure that the support structure is there. We also know that the central budget at DOE has ballooned, and it has not been helpful for principals or for teachers in helping to manage anything. They're finding out, literally, my sister, on Twitter, whether or not she's going to school the next day. So that means that your upper management is not working. That needs to be allocated to the school building so that there is real access and community at that school building to address all of the needs of those kids. And it's going to take all of us and having a lot of conversations about the experiences as we go forward. But with that, I am going to have to jump because I do have a 6. But I really have had, I've enjoyed this. I love your timer. I will give it up for the timer and your incredibly thoughtful questions. When I'm mayor, I want to hear from you. You hold me accountable for what I said in the forum. And have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. But I'm going to go jump on another Zoom. I'm like a high school student, right?
Yes.
From each class to each class.
There we go. Thank you, Kathryn, for joining us today. We will hold you accountable should you become mayor, and appreciate the time that you spent diving into what our vision for education and justice is. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
See you soon, folks.
See you soon. But sure. And so the final vote question of the day is yes or no. If elected, will you increase the number of student support staff and services in New York City public schools and ensure that New York City public schools are fully and equitably funded on the city level? First person is Dianne.
Yes, absolutely.
And then Shaun. Absolutely again, but muted. I appreciate reading your lips though. I now know what you're saying. You want to go one more time so we can hear you and hold you accountable that way?
It was so important. I will say it twice. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Manuela, for the question. Thank you both of you for rocking with us until 6 and for answering our questions and diving into the vision for education justice that the young people who helped put this together have for our schools and our city. We will be there to hold you accountable if you win. And we hope that we will be paired with your own accountability metrics, right? Like to hold yourselves to the things that you say that you want for our schools and our cities and our young people. And, I encourage folks who have been listening and participating who want to engage in different campaigns to follow up with the people on this call and the people on this Zoom rather in their various ways. And I'm sure you can all share in a couple of seconds, but I do want to pivot to each of you to give some closing thoughts. And Cheyenne can put the clock on again. Let's do an extra 3 minutes for you, each of you. What are some closing thoughts you have about this, about education justice, about youth power, and also just about your vision for New York City as it pertains to young people? Let's start with Shaun and end with Dianne.
So thank you. Thank you for the birds and making us feel like we were outside even where we weren't. Thank you for the timer. Thank you for the incredibly thoughtful, probing questions. And you reminded me of something President Obama used to say all the time when advocates would come in and meet with him, and he would end the meeting by saying, "I agree with you. Now go make me do it." And that is what organizing and accountability does, is it creates power, and it is power that moves systems. Leaders within government obviously can do that, but they can't do it alone. They need to do it with the help of movements. And that's what you're doing with this forum, with all the work that you're doing. So thank you for your leadership. I want to say, I talked a little bit about my own childhood and my own public service being shaped by crisis. I have learned what it means to lead through crisis in my career, whether it was from those early days helping to rebuild the same neighborhoods I'd seen burning as a kid, or more broadly, whether it was leading housing in the city in the wake of 9/11, leading for President Obama a recovery from the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes. When Sandy hit our shores and my friends and neighbors in Brooklyn lost their homes and their lives, and in the wake of becoming budget director over the $4 trillion federal budget to lead through the crises of Ebola and Zika, where we made sure that emerging global health threats didn't become pandemics that cost tens of thousands of New Yorkers their lives. In every one of those crises, those who are most vulnerable, including our young people, before the crisis, were always hurt the worst. And that's why we need a mayor who will lead our recovery with those who are too often voiceless, invisible, left behind. That cannot be the city that we rebuild. So we need to repair and rebuild our city, but we need to reimagine it as a city that actually works for everyone. And that's the mayor that I would be. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Shaun. And Dianne, what are some closing thoughts?
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I'm not a traditional candidate. My ideas are pretty radical, but we're also living in a really radical time. And I think that this is a unique opportunity for us to transform everything that led us to these multiple crises and to build a new New York City that actually works for all of us. My campaign calls for integration, but it's really important for us to actually distill that. The answer to integration is not just desegregation. Integration without culturally responsive education, without diverse teachers, and an inclusive curriculum is not going to help our young people, nor is it really going to be equitable. Any proposal that doesn't call for fully integrated, fully funded, and equitable, free early childhood through college and or work will continue to fall short of meeting our community's needs and is not good enough. We need to transform on a revolutionary level. And that means combining culture, healing, and academics, and including people in the classroom who genuinely love our young people. And that's the commitment that I can make to you all, that as mayor of New York City, I will commit to a radical and revolutionary transformation of our systems that address the root causes of the inequities and injustices that we and our communities have carried on our backs for so long. And I think that together we can do that, and our time is now. So thank you so much for hosting us today.
Thank you, and thank you for that, Dianne. Thank you to all the orgs who pulled this together: the Brotherhood Sister Soul, Children's Defense Fund, Dignity in Schools, Girls for Gender Equity, Integrate NYC, NYCLU Teen Activist Project, Urban Youth Collaborative, and Youth Power Coalition. Thank you to all the folks who offered questions. Thank you for the young people who offered questions on the stage. And thank you to you all for rocking with us for this long, and also for closing out with the vision that y'all have for this city about repair, transformation, and radical and revolutionary shifts, because that's what we need, and that's also in line with our own vision. And so I wish you all the best in your day. I don't know where you're going off to, but I hope
I'll do another Zoom.
Keep zooming along, and have a great day. And thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe and well, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank young people.